Think back to a moment in childhood that never made sense until now. Maybe you were praised for winning an award, or maybe you were getting praised for excelling at a project. Whatever it was, you were only met with indifference or someone minimizing your big things. Or maybe it was something subtle as you being told that you're too much, or you cry a lot, or are too sensitive. If that happened to you, there is a possibility that you were raised by emotionally immature parents or caregivers. And today we are going to talk about 10 ways that you were raised by emotionally immature parents or caregivers and how it's affecting you now. Before we dive into the 10 ways, I want to make something really clear. Having emotional immature parents is not always obvious because from their vantage point and from yours at times, you had all of your material needs possibly met. However, you didn't have your emotional needs met, and your emotional needs were minimized with telling you to just get over things really fast or stop crying or you're being too lazy or all of these things that may have minimized some of the feelings that you were going through when you were a child. And then as you get older, you were taught certain things like, well, they did their best, or they didn't have great childhoods, or blah, blah, blah. It's always something to take the pressure and the responsibility off of them to do the right thing. Or you might have heard stuff like, other people had it worse, or they provided everything I need. And while these things may be true, they don't negate the impact of having emotionally immature parents on a developing child. Let's explore each sign and its impact. Sign number 1, being the responsible one. Now, being the responsible one may seem like a badge of honor, but it's not. You become an emotional caretaker of your parents' emotions. You also had to manage your parents' feelings and their thoughts and their views. All of those things was your responsibility. And this taught you to put others' needs before your own. And what happens is that you develop hypervigilance to emotional needs. You become a people pleaser. How this shows up now is you probably have a very difficult time receiving care from other people. You feel responsible for everyone's emotions around you and you're trying to manage them all the time. You get burned out from excessive caregiving and struggle to identify your own needs. Sign number 2, being the sensitive one. Sometimes you may have suppressed your emotional feelings. Sometimes you were left to deal with emotional big things on your own. This is one of the hardest things I struggle with because I was always called the sensitive one. When you are called the sensitive one, you have a difficult time expressing your emotional needs. You also have a difficult time trusting your emotional experiences. And so this is how it shows up in present day. It shows up in present day by feeling you are too much emotionally when asking for your needs to be met or around other people. Sign number 3, emotional whiplash. Emotional whiplash is walking on eggshells. You didn't know whether your parents were going to be extremely happy one day or sad. You had no clue. So that causes emotional whiplash. And this emotional whiplash also determined how the household mood was. So if your parents were upset, the whole house felt off and depressing. You never knew what version of your parents you were going to get. How this shows up today is common for people who experience emotional whiplash. You have anxiety around abandonment. You have difficulty trusting consistent support. You also have this need in your body to prepare for emotional withdrawal. And this may cause you to struggle with intimate relationships. Sign number 4, spotlight shifting or always making it about them. So how does that show up when you have emotionally immature parents? Your achievements are about them. Your struggles go back to how it wasn't that bad for them. Your needs were seen as a competition or your parents tried to compete with you. Your independence was viewed as betrayal. That is a huge one. How does that show up now? You probably have a very difficult time celebrating your success. You have a tendency to minimize any accomplishment, big or small. You struggle with healthy self-focus, feeling really good about yourself. You also fear outshining others. Sign number 5, no middle ground, black and white thinking. Everything growing up was either all good, bad. People were either perfect or terrible. Mistakes meant total failure, and there was no nuance allowed. How does this show up in your life today? The perfectionist trap. Never having room for making mistakes. You don't know how to tolerate people who can be careless. Growing up with emotionally immature parents, carelessness wasn't just you being a child or you being able to make mistakes. So carelessness was a no-no. So that's another way it shows up now as you are an adult. And lastly, it shows up with you having a very all or nothing thinking. Sign number 6, having connection barriers. So how does this show up, or how did it show up when you were a child? Emotional conversations were avoided. Emotional intimacy was avoided. No hugging, no intimate connection with your parents or caregivers. Vulnerability seemed like a weakness. Surface level interactions were preferred. How does this manifest in your life now? Severe avoidant behavior, fear of emotional intimacy, or emotional intimacy feeling very odd or very uncomfortable in your body. You have a difficulty being vulnerable with people. You keep it very surface level because if people know the real you, then there might be a problem. You have a tendency to make all of your relationships superficial. They just touch the surface. They don't go deep at all. And you struggle keeping and maintaining emotional connection with people. Sign number 7, love through fault finding. Love through fault finding means criticism through communication. So how that showed up when you were a child most likely looked like praise was very rare or conditional. Criticism was the primary feedback that you received. You never got feedback to say, hey, this is good. However, maybe you can do this. Criticism was the main feedback form of communication with you and your parent. There was always a perpetual sense of inadequacy, and that left you feeling like nothing was ever good enough. So how does that show up? Today, you are probably a very harsh critic on yourself. Your inner critic is so mean, so nasty, and so rude.
So nasty and so rude.
Well, she's telling the truth on that one.
So nasty and so rude.
Sign number 8, no separate self, or there were no boundaries between you and your parent. There was boundary violations all around. Wherever you could look, there was a boundary violation. Your privacy wasn't respected. Your diary was read. Your personal space was always invaded. Autonomy was not recognized and it wasn't respected. So how does that show up now in your life? You have difficulty setting boundaries, of course. That is a challenge because you think that you're gonna rock the boat. You have guilt about having and expressing needs. You have a problem recognizing limits, and you tend to overextend yourself over and over and over again. Sign number 9, guilt as control. You being an emotional hostage within your household. This shows up in probably one of the worst ways because love was withdrawn and it was in a form of punishment. So maybe your parents stopped talking to you if you didn't do something that they asked, or maybe they started acting different for a short period of time. Guilt was used as a manipulation tactic. This is very common with parents who are emotionally immature. If this is one of the signs that is really hitting home, and think about a time where you felt like you can maybe talk to a parent and then all of a sudden, like a switch, they flipped on you. How does that manifest in your life today? People pleasing, fear of abandonment. You have a lot of difficulty with conflict, or The opposite usually happens with children who are raised by emotionally immature parents. They either have they have a difficulty with conflict, or they are very confrontational because they can't do that with their parents. And you have anxiety around disapproval. Number 10, gaslighting and manipulation. This shows up as denial of reality. Your experiences were denied. Problems were swept under the rug and you just moved on, yelled at one minute, next day everything was fine. The family image was prioritized before the truth. So having secrets, hiding what was actually going on in your household is very common. And difficult emotions ignored. How does that show up today? Self-doubt, difficulty trusting your perception, tendency to minimize problems, and you struggle with reality validation. So what are all of these patterns or signs create? They create emotional echoes. Emotional echoes show up in relationships, job, career, with friends, or daily interactions. In relationships, you fear abandonment, have difficulty trusting people. You have a very hard time getting close to people and connected with people because you don't feel that your emotions or your vulnerability are going to be safe. Then it also messes up your self-perception. You're very harsh on yourself. So nasty, so rude, and that is a constant thing playing in your mind or in the background of your mind when you're trying to move forward and achieve things. There's always doubt. In daily life, it makes you very hypervigilant. It makes you someone who may not take risks. It makes you someone who is very on the up and up. I noticed that with working with clients that children who have emotionally immature parents who are now adults, one of the biggest signs is that they are very hard on themselves when they make mistakes. Growing up, there was no room for carelessness because carelessness often ended up with you getting in trouble or something happening or you getting blown up on. Understanding how these signs manifest in your life is good, but how do you change them? Some of the ways that you can change them are celebrating small things. I don't care if you found a parking space, celebrate that. Trust your experiences, honor your feelings, learn what your feelings are, figure out what sadness is, what anger is, what indifference is, figure out what all the feelings are and be able to acknowledge them. Also, allowing space for grief. Like I said, the carelessness and not having space for grief is very hard. Children who are raised or adults who were raised by emotionally immature parents. You also have to build new patterns. You have to create safety within yourself and for yourself. What does safety look like for you? You have to learn how to identify and express your needs and your emotions. Practice healthy boundaries and self-validation. And what are you doing to fix that? Having emotionally immature parents doesn't mean you're doomed. If you recognize these signs and how it affects you, let me know in the comments and tell me how you are working towards to heal yourself. Now, having emotionally immature parents is not the end of the world. You have to create your own boundaries. You have to come up with your own system. You also have to figure out how you're going to heal those things. And when you do, you will create more safety and security for yourself. So make sure you like, share, and subscribe for more topics like these.